Joey here, Caribou Weather Dude. It's been a while since I made one of these episodes. Weather and the fire environment. How are weather and wildfires connected? The thing is, they really need each other. They do. A wildfire cannot exist without the weather. So, let's talk about today precipitation and instability. You might say to yourself, well, precipitation's pretty straightforward kind of thing. Rain puts fires out, right? It can. Sometimes it does. Donnie Creek took 100 millimeters of rain at one point, I think in August, and the fire came back. So rain can settle the fire down and make it have a nap, but sometimes it's going to take a little more than just a little bit of rain. So we're going to look at the factors of precipitation that affect fires. First rumble of thunder.
Over in 2 for deck 4.
Yeah, go ahead.
Pump is off.
Yeah.
Thank you. We got a pretty good rain core. There'll be lightning in it too, so keep your heads up and be safe. Keep away from them hose lines. Precipitation has several states that depend on temperature and stability of the atmosphere. So right now we're seeing snow coming across British Columbia. Snow sometimes affects fire. Yeah, of course it does. It will, again, make fires want to take a nap and sometimes put them out. Sometimes fire will live all winter long underneath the ground and the snow will merely insulate its existence. So we do have different kinds of precipitation that do fall. So rain being the one you think of the most. And there's, of course, different variations of rain in terms of like how big and how heavy it's falling, how fast the precipitation is piling up. So you could put drizzle in as a kind of rain. Snow, we just talked about. Ice pellets. So what are ice pellets? That's, the grapple hail you might think of as snow pellets. Hail, most often commonly associated with thunderstorms, right? So people are always surprised when they see hail in the summertime. But that's the most likely time to see hail, because what creates hail? Instability. That's when everything is being forced upwards because of convection, and that precipitation gets up high in the cloud and begins to freeze. Well, most precipitation starts off as snow somewhere up high in the sky. So showers, they can all occur during fire season. So you can have very different kinds of precipitation on different kinds of day. Precipitation that lasts short periods, precipitation that lasts long periods, precipitation that's heavy, precipitation that's light. So it will affect fire starts. Obviously speaking, lack of precipitation over an extended period will lead to drier fuels and increased chance of ignition, while moderate to heavy precipitation will limit the chance of ignition. There is that as well, right? One thing that they don't mention in here as well is the relative humidity that precipitation brings. So when you have a large area of precipitation going on, sometimes you're not even experiencing that precipitation, but you are experiencing the air mass being wetter and heavier. So that itself will affect how fires burn. So sometimes you don't necessarily get slammed by the rain dead on, but you do get some of the benefit of the wider, humid air mass that's moving through, in which that rain is somewhere in the middle of. People don't think about this aspect of precipitation much, but it does affect firefighters' safety. Yeah, and also our mental health, especially when you're working on steep slopes and things get wet. Often the black, you're working on it, you're moving around on it. When it gets wet, it turns slick. It can be a big source. And I just saw someone the other day who managed to break their ankle very, very badly while simply walking and just stepping funny, right? I know a surveyor I used to work with, John, he was walking around the pit at the mine, and one day he just stepped funny and then destroyed his leg. It took him like 2 years to get himself back. So, you doesn't have to necessarily be steep ground either. In his case, it was relatively flat where he was when he had a slip. Getting wet can affect your mental health. But also, I can think of a time during that period of extreme rainfall we experienced in May up at Peace Country this spring, where they wanted to put us out in the field to go to work in that morning, and it was pounding rain. And I said to the incident commander, I'm not taking my crew out there. It's too wet. It's raining too hard. There's no work that's getting done. There's no work important enough right now for us to be out there. The fire's settled. Also, in the Peace Country especially, when things get wet, those back roads turn slick. I can think of other times, such as in 2018, when I think it was the Rainmakers unit crew, they got a truck just sunk up past its axles, and I think it was stuck there for like 2 weeks after fire season. It took quite an effort to extricate this truck. So there is not just the safety of your crew, but the safety of the road itself as well, right? What can happen if you get too wet? You can get sick. Certainly this spring, up at Charlie Lake, which is near Fort St. John. We had a camp there, and something close to 100 millimeters of rain came flying through there at near mid end of May, and we all got very, very wet, and it was days of heavy downpours. And I think a lot of people from that camp ended up developing some manner of sickness. They were physically worn down. So I mean, there's the possibility of hypothermia, but I mean, during summertime, how often are you going to be experiencing hypothermia? Fire season tends to happen when things are hot. However, when you have a long period of cold, wet weather like that, I was shivering. I was at one point sitting inside the bathroom trailer at the camp, and I was huddled up. There's a little heater down on the floor now, down by where you change, going into the showers, and I was sitting down there, huddled up next to that heater, trying to get warm. And certainly, it took me weeks for my lungs to cough out all the humidity that was coupled with the amount of smoke inhalation I'd received through that tour. It was a very, very smoky. Uh, it affected my body big time. So other people got quite sick. Viruses did go around. Precipitation can cause hypothermia, but more often, you see fire seasons end in a wet, shitty kind of ending where everyone's at a camp and everyone's getting rained on. And it's like, well, we all know that fire season's going to be called off now, but we're just trying to get those last couple days in. Is, a couple more paydays, couple more line days, and you're getting rained on, you're getting snowed on, and a lot of people go home to start their off season and get quite sick. So of course it has seasonal variations. Precipitation producing storms are more active in the spring and fall. Of course that is true. We do know that if there's going to be something like an atmospheric river that comes and gives a crazy deluge of rain to British Columbia somewhere, it's probably going to happen in like November, or it's probably going to happen in March, April, May, June, or something like that, right? June's especially wet in BC often, but not every year. Of course, it wasn't terribly wet this year. So you do have different kinds of showers, of course, too. When in the summertime, thunderstorms develop up, and you can have areas of very, very heavy rainfall in a very tight storm, right? So you can have storms that drop 30, 40, 50, 60 millimeters of rain in an hour. So you're probably going to get that intensity of heavy, hard rain in the summertime sometimes. You might just get showers though as well. You have diurnal variations. So during the summer months, afternoon and evening showers, they're more common, right? So more often than not, that convection, that heating of the ground all day is going to raise moisture up into the atmosphere, and it's going to coalesce and organize, and it's going to decide to become a thunderstorm, or it's just going to rain itself out as a shower, or maybe it'll do both. How those summertime storms behave completely depends on how stable the air is. Let's talk about instability. Stability of the air mass refers to the tendency of a parcel of air when it is lifted to either continue rising or to sink back to its original level. What does that mean? So you have a parcel of air. It gets quite warm out, and you start having some convection. That air starts to rise, right? So is it rising, or is that parcel of air sinking? That's really all we're talking about. Air mass instability is not a primary element of fire weather. Knowledge of cloud formation and weather, as well as knowledge of fire behavior, rely on understanding of the concept. Now, this is true. It's not a primary element of fire weather, but air mass instability can have a big impact on your fire, how it behaves, especially if your fire is creating its own thunderstorm. So that happens sometimes when you get pyrocumulonimbus clouds coming out of your fire, right? So there is that. Certainly, you look at some of our experiences this summertime, where we had a thunderstorm coming in, and the winds weren't blowing the direction that the storm was traveling. It was sucking in because it was developing, it was growing. The air is either rising or sinking, and thunderstorms are either growing or they're dying. They're never in a stable, consistent, they're never steady, this is how I am. They're always in change of some kind, right? So they're either rising or they're sinking. They're either growing or they're shrinking. In that process, that can change how winds inflow and outflow and things like that from any particular cell. So air mass instability and stability can impact your fire. That convection certainly, although most likely what's going to happen is that instability could lead to an afternoon thunderstorm or something like that. Heating from below makes the parcel of air more buoyant, right? So this is pretty simple stuff. Cooling from above makes the parcel more buoyant. Air converging in a low pressure system, that can force air upwards. So these are different ways that parcels of air can be lifted. How does cooling from above make the parcel more buoyant? Well, because that means that the air is warm below, so it's going to rise. Heating from below, there's really, those two things are saying the exact same thing. I mean, what's heating from below and what's cooling from above? Well, maybe it's not heating from below, but it's a warmer air parcel below, right? So either or, you're going to have cool air above and warm air below, and that's going to make warm air. What does warm air do? It rises. Air converging in a low pressure system forces air upwards. So sometimes you have, when you have two areas of weather coming together, one is going to force the other one up. It's pretty simple, right? So the warm air obviously is going to want to be at the bottom. That's what it wants to do. It can be forced upwards by topographic features such as mountains. So we call this orographic lift, orographic, orogeny. So as your weather system is moving across, say, the interior of British Columbia, it's coming across, and then finally it's coming off that plateau, and then it starts to hit the Caribou Mountains, and that forces it upwards. That's why we start to see more thunderstorms in the Caribou Mountains. Similarly, if you look at the coast mountains, you have that orographic lift and precipitation and weather. Different air masses are coming in off the coast. They rise up off the mountains, and what does that do on the backside of the mountains? It makes a dry area, right? So there's always that dry belt on the east flank of the mountains in Western Canada because of orographic lift. So we just talked about this. The advancing front pushes cooler air under the warmer air, lifting up the warmer air. So you think about, here's one front of air and here's another front of air, and when they hit, the cooler one's going to force the warmer one up. Lifted parcel of air may continue rising or sink back to its original level. So it's going to do one of two things. It's never going to just sit in the same place for very long. I mean, sometimes you get what looks like pretty stable air, and that's when you start seeing certain kinds of clouds, that lenticulars and things that sort of show that there's a stable area of air, a stable air layer of air. But mostly the case is the air is going to continue rising or sink back to its lower level. That's all it really intends to do. So when it is rising, that's when it is called unstable. It's warmer than the air that surrounds it. So fire behavior is more intense in an unstable air mass. And then we were just talking about that too, right? So the different ways that a storm can affect inflows and outflow air. So the inflow is the storm growing, the outflow is the storm dying. Sometimes they're doing it at the same time. Sometimes there's inflows and outflows going on at the same time. The parcel continues rising. It's called unstable. So it's warmer than the air around it. How can those air masses push and pull on fires is the big thing. So we saw with the one burn we did off this summer where the fire was being sucked on by, it was being pulled the direction we wanted to go by the storm. But then when the storm arrived, the outflow of the storm, the gust front of the storm came and blasted on that and tried to push that fire up over the guard. Luckily, most of the fuel that had burned off between where the fire originally was and the guard, that meant that there was less. And then, of course, the precipitation hit. So we happened to win that day. We were kind of lucky. But, that's the reality is when you have unstable air, it's generally going to be warm at the surface, right? So that's in itself going to affect your fire behavior. You need that surface heating to drive the development of a thunderstorm. That surface heating is going to impact your fire. It's going to make your fire want to burn. A parcel that sinks back to its original level is called stable. So it's cooler than the surrounding air. Fire behavior is less intense during stable air mass. It's less windy out, and it's generally you're probably going to have somewhat drier air if the air mass is stable, right? You're not going to be looking at 100% humidity if the air mass is stable. Certainly not in British Columbia, at least. The air mass in a high pressure system is generally stable, and the air mass in a low pressure system tends to be unstable. So if you don't know what low pressure and high pressure is, high pressure being more air, say you have like a pop bottle, and you blow on it until it blows bigger than it can actually. So that'd be high pressure inside there because it's forcing more air in than would generally be. Well, if you suck all the air out, then you have low pressure inside, right? So less air in an area tends to be low pressure. So these are just some quick look throughs at the ways that precipitation and instability affect forest fires. And if you are a firefighter, this is stuff that you should be learning, and do keep coming back to this channel and try to find more. If you're not a firefighter, it does help you to know more about how fires behave and how weather influences fire behavior, because weather is the big factor. More likely that are the fuels dry on the ground, well, the weather is going to be the reason why they're dry or not dry, right? So weather is everything on a fire. And if you are not a firefighter, you're just a random citizen of British Columbia, it does help you to know these things and understand these things, that drier air does what, wetter air does what, more precipitation does what, less precipitation does what, thunderstorms do what, right? Please keep coming back. Please subscribe, hit like, hit share, tell a friend, and keep learning always, because that's what life is all about. Okay, see you next time. Bye now.